Good morning, Governor. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very, very much for allowing your state to host for a couple of days the Occupy Bakar resort movement.
Okay, good. I didn't know you needed state permission.
Well, so far there's been a law-abiding movement, and it's due to leave at lunchtime, and any stragglers, well, we know what to do with them. First of all, 1977, you introduced tax incentives for solar collectors, really the first of its kind anywhere in the world. You obviously had a vision for what was then called alternative energy. How has energy evolved in a way that you expected and a way that you didn't expect, in a way that's exciting and in a way that's frustrating?
Well, first of all, the tax credit was 55% for the installation of solar collectors, mostly heating hot water from the sun, and also a 25% tax credit for conservation improvements. The first thing I would note is we didn't even think of the cost of that. We just didn't even think of the cost. Later, many years later, I found out it cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And today, when you talk about a tax credit, they score it very precisely. So in those days, tax credits were just free virtue, at least in our minds. And that was nice, because nobody put up any resistance and there were no votes.
Those were the good times.
Those are the good times. Of course, California at that time, a year later, had a $6 billion surplus on a $24 billion budget, as compared or contrasted with the $26 billion deficit that I inherited on a $90 billion budget. So the world evolved in some different, in some ways, negative ways.
That I hope was somebody else's fault.
Yes, that was the mess that I inherited. Yeah. By the way, every governor usually inherits a mess.
And it's worse when they come into office than they thought before.
I didn't inherit a mess, if I could just put in a little plug here, because I'm dealing with the Wall Street Journal. Ronald Reagan doubled the state income tax, and that was one of the contributing factors to our $6 billion surplus. Or at least it wasn't an impediment, let me put it that way. So there's a lot of reasons why economies grow and why California grew, but it was a very exciting time coming out of the oil embargo. And there was that sense of vulnerability. So that gave a real impetus. We have to do something about efficiency and alternatives to oil. And then, of course, the pollution. And California has always been a leader. If we go back to it, and it's not been a Democrat or a Republican idea. It started with Richard Nixon in the White House and Ronald Reagan as governor of California. And California got a special permission to be able to set its own vehicle emission standards. And that, going forward, allowed California to set the first greenhouse gas emission standards for automobiles. And ultimately, that was adopted by the federal government after many lawsuits and lots of battles. But how it evolved, it ramped up quickly. We didn't know quite where we were going in those days. But by the mid-'80s, California had over 90% of the wind generated electrical energy in the whole world. Then the oil prices collapsed. Solar energy became kind of a no-no in certain quarters, and we lost a lot of ground. One thing that really did last, though, was the efficiency standards. This is the Title 24. California adopted very strenuous building standards that were tailored to different climate regions in the state, and those standards have been updated. As a result, I think reasonable estimates show Californians have saved about $50 billion over that time. Lots of jobs created, and we set the pace for the nation. And then we did also lay the foundation for renewable energy, cogeneration, which wasn't always renewable, but it was third-party, independent power, more deregulating the markets. So California, not only in alternative energy, but a different model from the utility model was definitely attempted and pushed in many ways. But again, that was more than 30 years ago. So the point is, you have to think big, think long, but you don't get there overnight.
79 was 3 Mile Island. But how have your views on nuclear changed? Were they fashioned by that experience? I mean, you have the plant now between Los Angeles and San Diego, which has an issue which may affect Californians this summer?
It might, and and we're working to make sure that we cover our electrical needs. Very important, 2,100 megawatts.
Would you describe yourself as pro-nuclear now? What's the right
I would
knowledge?
decide, well.
Or tolerant of nuclear?
Yeah, certainly. I'm more skeptical of everything.
Right.
So I've seen things, I'm skeptical of even of my own ideas. So
Particularly of journalists.
of journalists, well, no more of journalists, politicians, priests.
Lawyers?
Lawyers, there's a whole crowd. Wall Street, particularly hedge fund operators, yeah. Just looking at stuff, shit happens, okay? I shouldn't put it that way, but
but we've got people here who can... We can recycle that.
Good.
There
Okay.
are people who are going to be buying it.
So yeah, no, I'm not. Look, the technology. We didn't know what Facebook was. We didn't know what Google was. I talked to the founder of Qualcomm in San Diego. I said, did you have the idea of Qualcomm before you founded it? He said, I didn't even have it after I founded it. So ideas evolve, and there are breakthroughs, disruptive or not. And therefore, nuclear's got issues, but it's good for greenhouse gases. It's pretty reliable. Our plant at Diablo Canyon is going at 98% reliability, which is a lot higher than it was 30 years ago. So look, I'm open to it. I want to make stuff work. I want to deal with climate change, because the best that I can tell, that's a big risk that's there. And people can differ about it, but 97% of the peer-reviewed scientific papers support the science undergirding the climate change analysis. So I want to deal with stuff, and you got to try many paths, because a lot of them don't work. And so I'd say I'm open, I'm curious, I like to try new things. So if we didn't try something before, maybe we can try it now. And stuff we haven't done, let's look at that too.
You've been assiduously taking notes these past couple of days. What you've heard about nuclear, the directions in which development is going, does that give you reassurance or give you pause?
Well, there aren't any nuclear plants coming online, so I don't have to deal with that. I don't come to a lot of opinions if I don't have to make a decision about it. So if there's something that's going to come up before the Public Utilities Commission, or there's a piece of legislation, we have a bill that says you can't site a nuclear power plant unless you can demonstrate a way to dispose of the waste. Yeah. I happen to have signed that bill. So before you can get one, I'd have to change that bill. And if someone starts a bill running through the legislature, I will definitely engage the issue in a very honest, open-minded way. So yeah, it's another complexity. I got to know a lot of stuff. I mean, even the state budget is pretty complicated. And now if you want me to understand nuclear power and economics and tax incentives, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. So I definitely say nuclear is a serious technology that serious people have to think about, and I certainly would include myself in that group.
And the poet laureate, you announced a new poet laureate yesterday.
Yes.
The first Hispanic poet laureate.
Well, to tell you the truth, I hadn't even heard about this poet laureate a week ago. So, as I tell you, I mean, nuclear power, poetry, I mean, I got to kind of focus my attention on just a limited number of things. The law now is, in California, I didn't create this one, that the Arts Council serves up 3 names. Yeah. And then you look at it, and my staff said, we think this guy's the best. I called my friend Gary Snyder, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, and he didn't call me back. So I didn't get his recommendation, but I got my staff. They said, this is the man. Okay, let's go for it. That's my total confession here.
Well, I was wondering, because I looked up Mr. Herrera's poems, yeah. And there's a poem which is called Let Me Tell You What a Poem Is. And a line here, there is no poem to speak of, it is a way to attain life without boundaries. And I wondered whether that description actually describes you.
No, life without boundaries, yes. I think the key is boundaries. Yeah. So maybe you put it this way, imagination, in some sense, doesn't have boundaries. But if all you have is imagination, that's akin to insanity. Yeah. The other side is rigor. So you want rigor, but not just rigor, that's rigor mortis.
Yeah.
But you don't want just imagination. So it's the interweaving of imagination and rigor that gets stuff done. So yeah, you can imagine, and an anthropologist by the name of Gregory Bateson once inscribed a copy of one of his books to me, that the new comes out of the random. So that has with it the taste of imagination and no boundaries. But then you have to have order, management, sequential steps. So we need both. So if you, and also the sense of no boundaries is also hubris, no limits. That was Greek tragedy when the hero, the tragic hero, didn't have a sense of his limits or boundaries, and then hubris, and then nemesis, and that's not good. So we want to respect the limits and the boundaries, but we don't know what they are. So that's where imagination drives us forward.
We'll get to the truly random later on when we get questions from the audience. As for the subject of fracking, and apart from the dangers of mispronouncing the word, where are you on fracking?
Where I'm on fracking, I called up one of our leading oil companies and said, what's the story on fracking? This was a week ago. Said, well, it's not as bad as the environmentalists say, and it's not as safe as the oil companies say. I said, well, could I get a briefing on this? I want to spend a few hours. He said, yeah. So sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to be able to answer your question better, but I can't tell you any more today.
Do you think does your instinct tell you that it's a little more to the environmental concern or a little more towards the company reassurance?
I don't know. I mean, I think we've been doing a type of fracking for a long time. California has this heavy crude in the Central Valley, and you have to pump a lot of steam in there and do certain things. So to get that type of crude oil, it's taken injection. As a matter of fact, we had a breakdown in the granting of permits to drill in California. It was like a virtual stop. That's another mess I inherited. So I fired the people in charge, and now our permits are dramatically up. And but the concern was, in the last administration, that there were these environmental problems. I'm an optimist. I want to look at it, and California is the 4th largest oil-producing state, and we want to continue that. And if we want to just make sure we're doing the thing right. We got water issues. We don't want to pollute the aquifer, and I don't think any company wants to pollute the aquifer, because we have a lot of good trial lawyers in California. We have a very vigorous tort system. So I think there's a certain self-discipline that is going to operate on the management of the fracking operations.
That would be quite one large class action if the aquifer.
Well, that's exactly what this oil company executive said. We're looking at this very carefully.
But do you worry that the plunge in the price of natural gas has made more complicated the calculations about the viability of other energy forms?
No. And this, again, this is kind of new here, so I'm always subject to revision. But my thought is this. We have a law now that I signed last year. 1/3 of the electricity in California has to come from renewable sources. Some people felt there might be some sticker shock as all this renewable was brought in. Now I'm feeling, well, there won't be too much sticker shock because the low natural gas prices, which provides 40% of our electricity, will cushion that. So I see it as a very nice balancing wheel to the costs that are obviously there in the introduction of solar. Although the solar costs have come way down, the photovoltaic and wind is pretty competitive. So I think on balance, with our portfolio standard in California, 33 1/3%, I think it'll work out okay.
Were you surprised when the federal government imposed tariffs on Chinese solar panel providers?
Well, as far as I can understand, they're not too
punitive.
Yeah, it's pretty small. It's only on the panels themselves, which turns out to be about 1%. No, I think there's a certain amount of this is. Well, I don't want to comment too much because President Obama is running for election and I'm for President Obama. But I think we need a vigorous trade and exchange with China, and I intend to lead a delegation over to China. I want to get a lot of direct investment here, and I think that's a very important relationship. But how you manage it is a matter of delicacy and creativity.
But given what's going on in Washington, and given that there's pressure on both sides to be seen to be what you might call tough on China,
Yeah.
do you worry that that affects California's long-term relationship with China? That the level of misunderstanding becomes...
It could, but I'm going to try to be a spearhead to promote a very positive U.S.-China relationship. When the vice president, who we think is going to be Vice President Xi, came to California, spent a couple of days, and I'm looking forward to a good relationship. But this business of, dumping and our whole regime on how to handle that, countervailing duties on currency and all that, that's national stuff. Here, we in California, we hope we can prosper no matter what the hell they do in Washington.
But it inevitably has consequences for states.
Yes.
Because that national tenor, that national atmosphere is reflected in both capitals, and particularly in China, if the Chinese retaliate, the retaliation can be random.
Well, I do see that the fall in price from $4 a watt to $1 is very much caused by, influenced by what China's doing. And since we are, in California, are buying billions and billions of dollars worth of photovoltaics, we want to keep the price as low as possible and declining. So that's my goal.
Obviously, the economic influences the environmental. You're in the midst of this rather vexed budget debate. Are you nearer the end or nearer the beginning on that?
Well, you're always at the, you're never at an end, because every few years you have a recession, and usually before a recession you reach a certain peak of revenue which gets spent in time for the recession to create a nice deficit. And almost every governor leaves the deficit for the next governor. That's kind of the way it normally works. But we cut from $26 billion down to about $8 billion, and I have a proposal to cut another $4 billion and to get some taxes at the election. But I said I wasn't going to do a tax unless the people wanted it by voting for it. So we're going to have it on the November election.
Right. And you're confident that that'll go through now? Reasonably confident that you'll get the votes?
I'm working hard on it. I don't want to predict the behavior of 14 million people on one day in November. I'm going to do everything I can to get there. And whatever the people vote for, then we will have built in to our budget, because we're assuming we get the taxes. If we don't get it, we have something called trigger cuts, and the cuts go automatically into effect the week after the election. So it's a tax or a cut. It'll all be written down by July 1st, so we'll know where we are. People can choose, and whatever they choose, that's what we're going to do.
We have some of the world's largest, most influential companies here. Rightly or wrongly, the reputation of California is that it's now a tougher place to do business than it was, say, 30, 35 years ago. Do you think that's true?
No.
Why not?
Now, I'll tell you why. Because according to the Dow Jones company that had a subsidiary called the Fantus Company, F-A-N-T-U-S, put out a report in the early 70s, and it said that California had the 48th worst business climate among the 48 contiguous states. And I have that report. It was then issued by the California Roundtable. And all the same issues were then as now. But since that time, our gross domestic product went from 350 billion to almost 2 trillion. And all these different companies and all this venture capital, and we're getting 4 times more patents than any other state. Yeah, we have a regulatory framework that is challenging. And for some industries, it's more challenging than others. We also have taxes that are pretty serious, although we have low property taxes because of Proposition 13. We have some energy structures that can provide challenges. They're all there. I've set up an organization called Go Biz, and a fellow from Bank of America heads it up, doesn't even take a salary, and his name is Mike Rossi. If anybody's got a problem, call Mike Rossi. If you can't get hold of him, call me, and we'll work on it. We do have it's difficult, and it's challenging, But we are, I mean, last year, California increased its state product, by the way we measured, about 90 billion. And so there's a lot of money sloshing around California. And there are a lot of people who are getting their share of it. So I want to make sure all the different conditions work well to the extent I can. But the flip side of Silicon Valley and all this innovation is that people have these sophisticated needs and desires that turn into bills, that turn into laws, that turn into regulations. And then managing that complexity is challenging. So it's not like being in some of the more simpler states that are more, that aren't quite as yeasty and creative as California. Because just as you have people inventing the Apple computer or Hewlett-Packard, you have people inventing new needs and new ways to spend money to help achieve certain goals. And they're working as diligently and as creatively as the people in business. And as the governor, I'm kind of in the middle here, so I try to keep herd the cats going forward.
As the governor in the middle, we had this interesting intellectual property debate, which was very California-focused, or largely California-focused, with the divide, not civil war is an exaggeration, between Hollywood and Silicon Valley. Who was right?
Who was right? Well, it looked like Silicon Valley won that one, I guess, the first round. The Hollywood folks are a good, very important group in California. So, to tell you the truth, I didn't take an active role in that particular fight.
You weren't refereeing that one?
Well, it's like everything else. There's powerful forces on both sides, and they see things differently. I heard a new term recently called cognitive map. And there's a lot of different cognitive maps that people have in their minds, and that's different interests see things differently. So the Hollywood folks are very worried about privacy and the billions of dollars they lose from people stealing their intellectual property. On the other hand, the people selling technology, wanting to make their technology more and more useful, run up against that. So I think you let the forces collide, and may the stronger win.
So speaking of the cognitive...
It's a Darwinian process. The weaker don't do as well as the stronger. That's just the way it turns out.
The cognitive map, talking topographically, if you were to chart the contours of brain power,
yeah.
Are the mountains higher in Silicon Valley or in Hollywood?
Well, maybe there's more imagination in Hollywood and more
Hollywood
rigor
imagines
in Silicon
the
Valley.
mountains.
Well, it's just a different expression of the imagination. But Steve Jobs had a lot of imagination too. So they're both very important to California, and they're both exciting. I mean, I have to say, Vice President Xi came to Los Angeles, and so he came to LA Live, which is very Hollywood. Although they also send a lot of Chinese delegations to Silicon Valley, or they send people there all the time.
Yeah, but not him. He had more fun in Hollywood.
He did have, and he came to a Lakers game. I was very impressed.
You've left important legacies through each of your terms. Do you have a sense of what your intended legacy is this time as governor?
No, you know what? I don't think about legacies. I think about, there's some things I'd like to get done. I got very interested in energy 30 years ago, and I brought a lot of very smart people. In fact, I had Amory Levins there with Herman Kahn, if you remember Herman Kahn, who was a very big thinker in every sense of the word. And I had Amory Levins and Herman Kahn discuss and debate energy issues, and they were rather different. They went on to 2:30 in the morning. What I like to do is expose good minds and see what we can develop by way of making the state more progressive, more effective. And what I'm trying to do now, so I don't want to think of a legacy. First of all, I don't think people remember governors that much. My father once said, who was governor, said, history will note. I said, Dad, history doesn't note much about governors. But I turned out to be wrong, because now they're saying my father built this water plan, or he was the governor when it happened, so he gets a lot of credit for that, and it was a big freeway expansion, and the universities expanded. So there is a certain legacy there, and it was the times as well as the man. But I am interested, I am reducing the prisons by putting more of the control and the rehabilitation, the surveillance at the local level. That's cutting the prison system, which expanded 500%. We're reducing that significantly over the next few years. We'll also have to complete our California water plan, and we need to spend billions of dollars finding a conveyance facility, building one, so that we can assure a supply of water. That's really important because if our levees break down, that could cut off the water to Silicon Valley in an earthquake. Not good. So we got to take care of that. I also have have a high-speed rail proposal. Very bold. And that's another thing we're doing.
But bold or bold?
Also, I have a 12-point pension reform plan to cut a lot of our future liabilities going forward. Then I have a plan to get the taxpayers to increase their taxes. And there's a few other things that I can't remember. So, but I've got a lot of ideas here, and I'm working on them. So what they'll think, and then a legacy kind of sounds like you're going to go away.
Well, that's certainly not true of you.
Well, I'm only in my second year of my third term. And I have, last time around, I was the youngest governor in the 21st century, 20th. Now I'm the oldest governor in the 21st. But I got a long time to go. So
Can I ask you that question during the third year of your fourth term?
Say that the third year. Well, so I just enjoy being here because I see what's happened. What is really interesting is to see things that I did and to see what they look like 30 years later. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But what I've found is that government can best solve those problems that it itself first created. So real problems get solved by people like Steve Jobs and David Packard and all those kind of people. But when we create some problems, then we can,
but I hope
if you lobby us real hard, we'll mitigate them.
But I hope you're not. But I hope you're not talking about solving problems that you created in a.
Well, I created some problems. Oh yeah, I did.
No, it's time for us to risk the.
I created the Political Reform Act. Got it passed by the people, Political Reform Act of 1974, and I said we're going to reduce the influence of money in politics. It didn't do that.
Now the embodiment of random, Alan Murray.
Can I, before we open it up, can I ask one question? Because we've had a lot of conversation here over the last 2 days about innovation and the importance of innovation both in dealing with environmental and economic problems, and some conversation about education as it relates to innovation. Yeah. California used to be the state that people from all over the country flocked to take advantage of its great public education system. Not anymore. What's happened and what can be done about it?
Well, that's not true. The University of California is a great school system. The Cal State, the state universities is different, but it also educates hundreds of thousands of kids, doing, I think, a pretty good job. The cost is going up. And the cost is going up because it is going up, and also the state has had to cut back. In the last 30 years, the prisons have gone from 3% of the general fund of California to almost 10%. So that's a big slice that has come at the expense of contributing general fund money to the university. Our Medi-Cal expenditures, which is Medicaid in the rest of the country, they've also increased rather significantly. That puts a lot of cost pressure, and why we haven't had a real balanced budget here in over a decade. So those are pressures. But the university, I think, is still a leading center of learning. More Nobel Prizes laureates than anywhere else that I know of in the world in terms of universities. So in our public school system, yeah, it's challenged. We're a school with a lot of low-income people. Half the kids are Spanish-speaking background. A lot of challenges going forward. We know the higher the income level, the greater the student achievement on average. So we have to invest more, and our budgets have been constrained. So we have to find the money, which I'm going for some tax increases in November, but we also need the rigor, the teacher evaluation, the benchmarks that can give the feedback to keep our schools improving. I myself, by the way, created 2 charter schools, the Oakland Military Institute and the Oakland School for the Arts. Very different. One is military school in partnership with the National Guard, doing extremely well, 95% low-income kids. And the art school, totally different program, stressing arts through an audition process, doing also well. So I don't wait around for the state. I went out and did something when I was mayor of Oakland. I'm still doing it, still raising money for it. So I'd say this is another thing that I think, to answer your question, they were talking about the problem of schools 30 years ago. People had various ideas on school reform. Every 10 years, we get new fads, new thoughts about how to fix the schools. We got 6 million kids. Turning that ship is a slow process. And whatever our difficulties, and they're real, we're still generating a lot of creative people. And we're generating a lot of business, whether it's Hollywood or Silicon Valley or San Diego, Orange County, lots of science, lots of technology, and the more humble things, hotel, hospitality, construction. There's a lot of stuff going on. So it isn't as good as it should be, but it isn't quite what some of the worst critics want to put it either.
Do you worry, Governor, that cases like that of Solyndra hurt the reputation of innovation? Doesn't that look like crony capitalism?
Well, I thought failure was part of the process. So you back things and say maybe they work and maybe they don't. So, you fail, Hell, I was out of office for how many decades here, But you got to try things. I don't know all the ins and outs of Solyndra. And one thing I do know, when you look at journalism, a lot of journalism, it's partisan, liberal, or conservative. Someone had an idea here, and Solyndra thought the market was one price, and it turned out the market was lower. Hallelujah. Solyndra's failure is our benefit, because it meant that costs have come down and they're not economic. Okay, so we still are charging ahead. California installed, 500 megawatts of solar last year. We'll do more this year. We're moving ahead, and I'd say let's use the failure to learn stuff, whether it's about the influence of politics or the bad lending practice, whatever it's going to be. Whatever Solyndra was, it was not anywhere near as dumb as the mortgage meltdown with those derivatives and all those complex, long-term capital management and AIG and all that other stuff. That was a multi-trillion-dollar screw-up. What was Solyndra? 500 million. I mean, chump change compared to
Wall Street.
To the Wall Street mess. So things screw up, and hold people accountable. But let's learn from it. I think we can learn a hell of a lot more from our mistakes than from our successes. So, I learn more from when I'm defeated than when I win. Because when you win, you think you're smart. When you're defeated, you know you screwed up, and then you can recalibrate and try again. So that's why I'd say Solyndra should be a plus, not a minus.
Yeah, Governor Brown, Gordy Bannister, good to see you again. I wanted to just first say thank you for your intervention on the injection permitting issue that occurred earlier this year. You did what you said, and it's one of those things I think that the oil and gas industry in California, quite frankly, was going to be a little bit skeptical about. You did what you said, and I just wanted to say thank you publicly for that, because it was the right intervention, I think, at the right time. I think the other thing, just to make sure, is sort of on the radar screen, because you said you were going to be looking at hydraulic fracturing coming up pretty soon. California does have shale. It has oil shale, and it has significant potential. And so I think the timing for you to be understanding what's happening with hydraulic fracturing, because, by the way, we have been doing here for 50 years, is something that's going to be really, really important to the future of the state, energy production in the state, and everything else. And, of course, we're willing to stand up and talk with you about that anytime you'd like to. So
soon.
I think it's time. I think
it
it's time.
is time. Good. Look forward to it.
Other questions, comments? Who am I missing here? Up there?
I guess everybody's in agreement in general.
Oh, right here. I'm sorry.
No dissenting voices.
Is that a success or a failure
It's
agreement?
a little bit of a failure. I like to, We got to provoke a little bit here.
Governor Brown, I'd have to say that you are arguably the best speaker that's been here, in my opinion. I think done a hell of a job with California, and I'm from British Columbia, where we have three of the same things. One, Hollywood North, two, resources like your oil and gas business, and a much smaller technological community. So, you know, I hope your train goes all the way to Narcissus on the Pacific, i.e. British California.
Okay.
Question right here. Identify yourself before you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Governor Brown. Michael Kruk, former CEO of Patagonia. I teach at Pepperdine now. I have a social, environmental, and ethical responsibility for MBAs, which is very popular now, embedding social, environmental responsibility into a great product or service. I have a very specific question and thought, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on it. As someone who lives here in this area, travels to Southern California a lot and San Francisco, every single, at least 2 or 3 times a week when I'm sitting at the 405-101 interchange, the incredible gridlock and the waste of human manpower, energy, it just, every day I and everyone else in there wonder why we don't have that high-speed rail. And I know you're a big advocate for it. I'm really excited about that. And I'm just wondering, how realistic is it that that's really going to happen in my lifetime?
Okay, well, yes, how come we didn't have it? Well, to tell you the truth, the last time I was governor, I signed a bill creating a high-speed rail authority. So they started to think about it. But it costs a lot of money, and you have a lot of competing needs, and so it takes a while. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, he got a bond issue passed, a significant bond issue that will finance the first part of it. And we have the money from the federal government and the state government to start the first 123 miles. And we can do that. The reason what makes it daunting is that where do we get the next phase of the money? So we can go from Merced to Bakersfield, but how do we get from Bakersfield to Palmdale? And then we want to bring the metro line of LA up to meet it at Palmdale, and then we want to get it from Merced up to San Jose, and then San Jose back into San Francisco. So it's a big deal. There's money, there's right-of-way, there's the political interests. I think if you look out over the next 50 years, and if you say we're going to get 20 million more people, and we got to either build more airports, we need more runways, we need more freeways. I mean, try building a freeway in Orange County, conservative Orange County. They stop you. Try expanding not an airport, rather, in Orange County, or an airport in San Diego. Very difficult to do, or in the Bay Area. So as I look at it, the high-speed rail is going to be, and the peer-reviewed analysis tells us it's cheaper to build a high-speed rail. It reduces greenhouse gas, more efficient, certainly higher quality than sitting in a car. And with so many millions of people going to the Central Valley, that, if we design it right and build the kind of cities, build out the cities of the future at these various stops, I think it will be a fantastic thing. So we're on track. We're having our business plan come out, let people evaluate it and give us their best ideas. But it's something, when you look at whether it's 50 billion or more, as you put the whole thing together, maybe more than that, and then you notice we got about 2 trillion. Say it's going to last 50 years. It's a pretty reasonable, it's well manageable with the funds we have. But it's big, and you have to be willing to marshal that money. And now with the oil prices up and people not wanting to pay taxes or more fees of one kind or another, it's a heavy lift. But I also have to say, building roads is a heavy lift, and keeping them in shape. The roads and the deferred maintenance is huge in California. If you have the high-speed rail throughout the rest of the world, they pay the operating and maintenance expenses. They don't pay back but a fraction of the capital outlay, but you don't pay back the roads either. So I think when you look at it economically and environmentally and quality of life, it makes a lot of sense. And we're on a track moving forward. We're putting out our business plan. We invite critique and analysis, but we're headed to start some building toward the end of this year.
Aaron.
Governor Brown, Aaron Kramer from Business for Social Responsibility. You bring something to politics that sadly is in very, very short supply. Ideas and creativity, willingness to try lots of different things and admit that sometimes they don't work. What can change so that there are more people like you in our political system these days, bringing creativity and shaking things up a little bit so that we really face the future? Because unfortunately, our politics are so stuck that we're abdicating leadership and abdicating our opportunity to shape the future.
Well, I think it's hard to be in politics. Politics has a certain natural selection, and you have to develop certain skills, like saying kind of memorable but not controversial things, and being able to raise a lot of money. Those are, if you don't have those two skills, it's hard to make it. But if you spend a lot of time developing those skills, you may not be that interesting or that creative. So that's a difficulty. Now, I had a couple of assets going in. My father was a governor, and my mother named me after him. So I had a nice brand starting. And because I had a nice brand, my father was beaten by Ronald Reagan, and Reagan served 8 years, then I got to be elected. Okay, so by the time I retired at 44, before I could collect a pension, by the way, you don't get that till you're 60. So, but anyway, I left at 44. I had several decades to come back. So I wandered around for a few decades, and here I am again. So I had a lot of time to do some study. But I think it is hard. Politics is a very competitive business. It's a lot of fundraising. It's a lot of empty talk. And if you can combine with that a sense of honesty and depth and balance and willingness to understand the other side, that's what you need. And it's a little hard right now because it's 24-hour news, multi-million-dollar campaigns, and then you're supposed to have time to figure out all the ins and outs of fracking or solar energy or schools.
Poetry.
Or poetry. What the hell is poetry? But I do know you need some boundaries. That's true. Anyway, I'll stop
Dan
there.
Yergin.
Governor Brown, thank you very much for your comments. You've said many memorable things, and you're not even fundraising here, so we're really very grateful for that. You are the founder of really more than anybody else of the modern wind industry. You mentioned that you now have a 33% renewable portfolio standard, and that you mentioned that lower gas prices helps roll it in. How difficult do you think it is actually to get to that 33%, and what worries you about it, and kind of have you thought about what the mix will be?
What the mix will be? No, well, again, I'm not a scientist. I studied Latin and Greek and spent 4 years in the Jesuit order.
And theology.
That's a lot of ascetical theology even. So, but I have a lot of bright people, and people on the Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, the Cal ISO, the Independent System Operator. All the people that I've talked to feel we're going to get to that 1/3, and we're very likely going to go beyond it. 40% is within the ballpark, within the 2020 or shortly thereafter. That's where we think we're going. The mix, we thought it was going to be more the central-based, then the PV costs come down. It has to be flexible. These costs are coming down. The utilities have to buy enough power contracts, and they're coming in pretty well. What worries me, of course, is sticker shock. So my counsel to the PUC, I want as much renewable energy as possible with as little sticker shock as possible. So don't let the consumers get mad at me, and let's do it. And if if the costs get too high, call back, check in. So we're going to go forward, and we think we're going to handle it. But they have a lot of other infrastructure needs. We got gas pipes we got to fix. We've got transmission lines, and so then when we buy solar, people could it's going to cost more every year. So I want to make sure they manage the cost, but we're open to innovation, and I think it looks pretty good.
So,
Daniel, I don't know. What do you? You're the
Dan's had his chance.
You've written that big
Dan's
book.
had his
I mean,
chance.
what?
Unfortunately, we only have time for one more very quick question right here.
What?
It's a quick question, Governor. Balu Balagopal from Houston. I wanted to follow up on the high-speed rail question,
Yes.
which provokes this question. It is sometimes. Do you ever find it tempting to say, "Wow, if only I had a little bit more dirigist authority. If I had a little bit more, instead of this muddled political system, things could get done." We look at China and envy how quickly they can get stuff done. But then do you say, but I'm not willing to make the trade-offs for the Americana I would lose? The reason I ask this question is, as Americans, we always muddle through. Has anything changed to lose your confidence that we'll muddle through, we'll be slower than China, but we'll get there? Do you wish for more dirigist?
More, I think if I understand your question, you mean you want to have more state authority to direct things. Well, there's probably no one in this room who's had more experience with the political mind than I have. I've talked to a lot of politicians, a lot of people. I don't know that I want to give. You have to be very careful giving the central bureaucracy more authority. We have a certain balance. We have a system. I work with it and live within it. So the Chinese have a communist party. It's a leading party. They have a university. They have some smart people. They're directing it. We have our elites. We have and we have different systems. So I can't change the system, first of all. So I'm going to just live within the one we have. And I'd say the biggest problem, the breakdown in Congress between the two parties is absurd. That's really bad. We have a similar thing in California, not quite as bad. And we've got to think as Americans, as Californians first. That's the big challenge. And so to think we're going to get a French-style economic direction kind of thing, we're not going to get that. I just settle for some agreement on taxes and entitlements and energy and climate policy. If we just work that through, and that means Democrats and Republicans have to reconfigure their cognitive maps. Let me put it that way.
Well, it's time for me to get decidedly dirigist and bring the session to a close. But the governor has been extremely generous with his time and with his thoughts, and we should be extremely generous with our applause.
Well, thank you very much.